Going to return back to general session. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Flag back there. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you to Morse for hosting us this evening. Kyle, welcome. I just had a couple of comments that I wanted to make. I don't know if anybody saw the article in the Portland Press Herald about the Portland Initiative. I didn't get the details on it. Unfortunately, I didn't get to read through the whole thing, but one of the things that I noticed, some of the things that the city of Portland is talking about, and when they couched this initiative, they said that they would not only be leading the state, but leading the nation in some of the items that they were talking about. One was increasing kindergarten readiness, something this board has already discussed. Another was having students reach grade level reading by 3rd grade, one of our superintendent's goals from the beginning of the year. And the third one was to exceed the 90% rate of high school graduation, something which has been a goal of this board, for a long time. So I just wanted to say that I think that we are on track in keeping up with the city of Portland. So if you get a chance, it's worth reading. The other thing I wanted to mention, just to kind of put some things in perspective and stretch this meeting out even longer than it usually is, I was listening the other day to a radio program, and I only caught the second part, but it had been, it's a radio program based out of Chicago, and they had done two 2-hour specials. And what they had done was they had embedded 3 reporters at a high school outside of Chicago for 5 months. And those reporters did a number of programs reporting back about what they see, what goes on in the high school, issues with, some issues with gangs, some issues with gun violence, some issues with academic achievement, issues with discipline. And I just think if you get a chance to hear it, the program is called This American Life. The host is Ira Glass. If you can hear that program, I think it would be worthwhile. And I think as we face some of the challenges we do within our district and look at some of the issues that we confront, it really put into perspective how fortunate we really are in our little neck of the woods compared to what some staff, administrators, students, families, communities have to deal with. It was mind-boggling when I heard, and this was a follow-up at the end of the program. They were talking about troubled districts around the country. There was one superintendent, and don't quote me on this, who had attended in his 3 years, had attended over 43 or 44 funerals of children within the community that had died as a result of violence. So something to put into perspective. Anyway, we will move on to item 6.0, approve and amend minutes of January 28th. Is there a motion to approve?
I so move.
Moved by Steve.
Second.
Seconded by Alan. Just take a moment, look it over. Are there any changes? Okay, I didn't pick up on anything. Okay, all those in favor of the minutes from January 28th as written. Raise your hand. None opposed. Okay, those pass. Okay, item 7.0, adjustments to the agenda. Patrick, do we have any?
No, I don't have any.
Okay, no adjustments to the agenda. Okay, we will move on to item 8.0, public session. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak? Okay, no one from the public this evening. All right, on to item 9.0, staff reports. 9.1, we have a technology update from Dean Emerson. So do you want to?
Yeah, Dean's here tonight to give you kind of, we put it on the calendar early on for two reasons really. One is to just provide an overview of our technology department for the district, what we have for equipment, infrastructure, staffing, K-12. Some of you may have a better understanding of what we have 7 through 12, but not K through 6. And then Mandy Knowles is here as a high school teacher to, I think, to discuss the one-to-one pros, cons. Our job here tonight is not to, our lease is up for one-to-one MLTI MacBooks at the high school level. Our job tonight is not to sell it to you one way or the other. It's really to provide you with some factual information of different options that we will have to consider as we go through this budget process. So, Dean.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we got to
sorry, we do have a slideshow.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much. This evening, we have a short presentation to talk a little bit about the existing technology in our schools, what we have K-12, as well as our plans for technology refresh in the future, some of the some feedback and information about the one-to-one environments in RSU1. We'll have a short presentation by Amanda Knowles from the Morse High School Academy, and I'll also share with you some results of a one-to-one survey. It was a survey to staff of one-to-one grades. So that will be available for you this evening as well. And Q&A, although I'm perfectly happy to take questions at any time throughout the presentation, so don't feel like you have to hold them to the end. Okay?
Dean.
Yes?
Just to be clear for the rest of the board, when you're talking about one-to-one, you're talking about at the high school, one computer for one student.
Correct. Anytime that we talk about a one-to-one environment, we're referring to one student, one computing device.
You're not talking about a student-teacher ratio.
That is correct. Sorry. Yeah, that would be something. Okay, just to provide you with a general overview, we have 8 locations, including schools in the central office. Those comprise roughly 2,000 devices, probably a little bit higher than that, but roughly 2,000 before we consider any student devices or personal devices that people bring into our network as well. We're connected on a wide area network through something called the Main Schools and Library Network. MSLN is how it's more commonly known. This is a program throughout the state that's funded through small surcharges on your telecommunications bills, and they allow schools and libraries throughout the state to be connected to one another and to a very high-speed internet pipeline. In addition, we have 5 support positions in this department. We have 1 technician, 1 MLTI coordinator. That person is, their primary role is to support the one-to-one deployment in grades 7 through 12. The IC coordinator, Infinite Campus, otherwise known as IC, that's our student information system. That package is a piece of software. It's a database that basically holds our student records, student demographic information, parent information, grades, teaching loads. Pretty much everything that we do is tied to Infinite Campus. 1 network administrator and myself. I will point out something I find interesting is that that's roughly the same number of people that we had prior to becoming an RSU and prior to going to a one-to-one deployment at our high school. So we've expanded greatly what we're doing, but we're doing it with roughly the same number of people. Some recent updates, additions. We implemented an email archive system. We use something now called Mail Archiva. This was a package that was recommended by other schools throughout the state. Basically what that does is any email that comes into our system or leaves our system that goes to an RSU1.org email address, that creates a backup of it. Excuse me. We've implemented something called a Web Help Desk. Web Help Desk is a ticketing program so that we can track all of the incoming requests for service as well as projects. It helps us to identify if we have a particular piece of technology that's giving us difficulty, if we have a particular user that needs additional help, if we have a school where we're getting an unusually high number of rates of incidences, things like that. It helps us to fine-tune where our coverage is and what kinds of work we're doing. We're currently evaluating network monitoring solutions. These basically help us to determine what is our uptime, what's our downtime, where is it happening, are there any patterns. Of course, excuse me. One of the largest projects we've had over the last year has been opening Warwick Central School. That school, if you haven't been, I can't believe it, because it's worth the trip. They are sitting in, as far as a technology standpoint, what we all would love to be able to provide at all of our schools. They're really quite lucky to have it. And I'll get into more detail as to what they have there, but suffice to say, it's quite a place. And over the summer, we moved from Novell to Linux. We use a product now called Rosera, which is basically the network operating system. So all of our servers run on that. Any questions so far? Great. So if you look at our elementary schools today, we're really I don't want to be doom and gloom, but we're in kind of dire straits, quite honestly. For years, we had this rotation of leases in place where we brought in new equipment every 4 years. We looked at the effective primary use lifespan of a computer to be 4 years, and we haven't been able to maintain that. Those leases were allowed to expire without being replenished. So that currently, our elementary schools, with the exception of Woolwich, are looking at computers that are 7 to 10 years old. They are either machines that we purchased on 4-year lease 7 years ago, or they're hand-me-downs from other businesses who they had reached the end of life with those companies, and they then donated them to the schools, which is wonderful. We appreciate that. But they have limited capabilities at this point. They're unable to run many new programs. They're not supported by the manufacturers of the operating systems, nor the manufacturers of the software that's installed on them. And they require more and more maintenance to keep them going. What I would say is that the staff are fabulous at those schools. They make greater use of that 7 and 8 and 9 and 10-year-old equipment than you can imagine. The wait time, just trying to get 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds to wait after clicking on a web page for 12 seconds for something to load. Doesn't sound like a lot of time to us until you actually click the button and then wait for it. Those machines are old. They've really done long years of service. Excuse me, sorry. And it's just time for us to replace them. And we have supplemented them with netbooks in some schools. But the netbook, again, is a very limited device. It's an inexpensive device. And what we find is that it works great until it breaks, and then it's not really worth much. So that's been our experience with those. We actually do have one elementary school that was using 9-year-old iBooks up until last year, but they finally expired. We just simply couldn't continue to get them to run. We sent them off to experts to try to get them to run for another year, and even they gave up. We just couldn't do it. So they actually have an entire lab now of netbooks. At the middle school, they have one lab of computers in the library, same vintage, 7 to 10-year-old hand-me-downs, antiquated, excuse me, of limited value. But they make the most of them. I mean, they keep trying. And then, of course, for grades 7 and 8, they also are part of the MLTI one-to-one initiative. So every student in grades 7 and 8 has a MacBook, excuse me, and they've been in that since 2002. And then we have various refurbished units scattered throughout the building in classrooms for mini labs and to perform specific functions. When I talk, go ahead.
Those MacBooks that the 7th and 8th graders have, how old are those?
Well, they're in their 4th year currently.
Okay.
Right now, we're in the very last year of the current MLTI deployment. We'll be packaging those up and sending them back in June.
Dean, can you just make the distinction for board members? That the middle school is no cost to the district, but the high school.
Yeah, the way that MLTI is currently set up, and it's changing, okay? MLTI in its current rotation covers every student in grades 7 and 8, as well as all full-time teaching faculty in grades 7 through 12. They're currently evaluating new proposals, okay, and the numbers on these are changing. We just finally got information from them late last week, but they're not going to be able to give us final figures for up to another 6 weeks or so. They're not sure what the next round will cover. It'll definitely include teachers and students in grades 7 and 8. We feel pretty confident about that, but it may or may not include the teaching staff, grades 9 through 12. The other unfortunate piece of news we just received is that even though we've been looking at, excuse me, I've had a cold, an EPS number for planning purposes, for budgeting purposes of $242 per student in those grades. The new budget, the new RFP looks like the least expensive option is going to be $271 per student. I just got that. So it's going to cost us more. And what we don't know yet is, are those teachers at the high school going to be included in the MLTI program, the part that's funded by the state, or are they going to be coming out of a local budget if we do, depending on what we choose to do? All of our faculty currently get MacBooks through the MLTI program. Every full-time teacher in grades 6 through 12 in RSU1 is a participant in that program. We pay out of our general fund for all the teacher devices K through 6. Moving forward, it may still only be K through 6 that we have to fund locally, or it may be K through 6 plus 9 through 12. We're not sure yet, and the state can't tell us. The other piece, before we move on to Woolwich, that I'd like to touch base on is where it says refurbished units for specific functions. When I talk about a 4-year rotation on these labs, what I'm really talking about is 4 years in a primary role, okay? And then after that, we redeploy them. We're not saying that after 4 years they have no value. We're simply saying that after 4 years, they're not current with the technology that's available. They're not able to run the software. They're not able to perform the functionality that the curriculum is pushing, or that we think it would be likely to push. So what we do is we then take those devices from those primary use roles and we redeploy them and supplement them either with additional classroom computers or an additional lab or something like that. So we continue to use them. I don't want you to get the mistaken impression that they're 4 years and then gone. Excuse me. In Woolwich today, obviously a new school, so they have an entirely new infrastructure. I have a slide later that talks about this, but I'll cover it now. Infrastructure is all the stuff that makes the network function, okay? It's the backbone, it's the highway, whatever you want to call it. It's the pieces that you never see if it works well, okay? But they facilitate all of the communication. They consist of cabling, switching, servers, wireless radios. That's what allows all of your devices, when you walk into the building, to connect to the internet, to share information with one another, to print, things like that. Woolwich also has a MacBook lab that's shared for their 6th grade, and a second one that's shared for their library. They have 150 iPads that are shared in grades K through 5 in rolling carts, so that basically you have 2 classrooms that share a single classroom set of iPads. They have interactive projectors in every classroom. There's an example of one there. That's an Epson, which is the same brand that we purchased for Woolwich. Those perform similar functions to what we commonly have probably heard of as smart boards, except that it's a new technology that's it's less expensive and very capable. And so far, we're very satisfied with them, I think. Excuse me. And they too are an MLTI school, having participated since 2002. So they also have had one laptop per student in grades 7 and 8 for the last 10 years.
The iPads are locally funded?
Correct. Well, they're funded through the new school purchase. In fact, all of the technology that is listed there, with the exception of the MLTI, which is funded through the state, is funded through the new school technology budget. So it's not a local budget issue. At Morse High School today, basically, in 2009, we expanded the one-to-one program, which, again, one MacBook per student. In addition, we have refurbished units for specific tasks set up in classrooms throughout the building. And at that time, we removed our physical lab as well as our portable labs. We had some rolling labs that had reached the end of life, which we're still using for various limited tasks. But in 2009, we made the decision to go to one-to-one at Morse High School. The unintended consequence of that has been that since that decision was made, we haven't invested anything in the elementary schools. It's just, at the same time that decision was made, in the subsequent years, we went through significant budget reductions, and decisions had to be made, and so the decisions that were made impacted those refreshes at the elementary schools. Some improvements and successes we haven't touched on yet. You have to really take your hats off. We have a very motivated staff. They solicit donations. They go out for grants. Some of them invest their personal money in technologies for their classroom. They just believe that strongly in. We have more than a few people who have purchased their own interactive projectors or their own interactive whiteboards. Those devices cost anywhere from $1,600 to $5,600. I mean, these are people who are really committed. We have the expansion of the one-to-one at the high school we already talked about. One of the things that we did 2 years ago, excuse me, was we entered into a new lease to add an LCD projector to each classroom. That was a really important step for us. It was a really modest cost, but what it allowed us to do was share the teacher classroom computer. Especially in the elementary schools, you know, they have practice already of kids sort of huddling up. When we have reading time or something, the teacher reads to them, everybody huddles up, they hold up the book. Well, this allowed us to do the same thing with the computer. Now you can have 16 kids in the classroom all at least be able to see on the wall whatever the teacher has prepared on their laptop. Excuse me. And this year we were able to send the entire staff to the Acton conference known as Maine Education Conference. This was a full day. We offered busing for faculty, or they could drive themselves, and they were able to take advantage of, you know, hundreds of possible sessions over the course of the day on any number of topics having to do with technology and education. So it was a really interesting and engaging conference, and I think that people benefited by being able to go together and to share the experience with one another. Hopefully that spurred a lot of conversation subsequently. So as we move ahead, we have to take a look at upgrading our infrastructure. We have to establish, once again, our 4-year rotation of technologies in the elementary and middle schools. To do that, we typically use a $1 buyout on municipal lease. Woolwich, because they already have so much, obviously wouldn't be included in this current round. They would be included in the next lease. And this basically addresses our primary use computers, which we'll go over exactly what that looks like in each school in a moment, but it's not sort of a pie in the sky, if we could have it all, what would it look like? It's meant to be a very reasonable, here's what we ought to be able to provide. Refresh the MLTI deployment in grades 7 and 8, and then determine our next 4-year rotation at Morse. We'll get into the different options in a moment, but those are the big questions ahead of us. The Infrastructure, again, switching, routing devices, the transport mechanism that creates the network that actually allows the devices to communicate with one another. Our existing practice has been to redeploy wireless radios from the middle and high school levels. We continue to do that in order to make our money go just as far as possible. And the upcoming budget includes an infrastructure refresh that would go for basically 8 years. Infrastructure equipment is very different than computing equipment. It lasts quite a bit longer. Now, what we're proposing at the elementary schools excuse me, is a new computer lab, which will be, depending on anticipated, projected enrollments, 16 to 24 computers per lab, as well as some additional funds to provide technologies such as iPads or iPad minis, document cameras, and digital cameras. And what we would do is, once we have a better sense from the state as to what monies are available or what the cost will be for one-to-one, that will dictate to some degree what we have available in these other places. But every elementary school would get a new lab as well as some additional technologies. Bath Middle School basically looks similar. I mean, grades 7 and 8 already have MLTI, so they'll all have one-to-one. But the 6th grade would share the computer lab as they do now. What I think we sometimes run up against is that it's not proportional, right? I mean, we have some elementary schools with small populations and others that have 2 or 3 times the number of students, and yet they basically are getting the same amount of technology, and that's because we have a base level that we have to operate from. Every school, in order for us to assess and to give the NWEA as an example, has to have a computer lab that's large enough for every student in logical groupings to go down and take that test. So to some degree, that drives our decision making when it comes to what technology we get. It would be nice for us to take a look at it sometime in the future when we had more money, something that was more representational based on student populations, so that you have a computer lab that's not being shared 20 computers with 200 kids in one building and 20 computers with 100 kids in another building, right? I mean, it'd be nice if we could sort of balance that a little bit. But at the moment, it's sort of a one-size-fits-all. And then at Morse High School, we're looking at 3 options. Excuse me. Continuing the MLTI laptop program, which is the 1 laptop per student. Look at a one-to-one deployment, but look at it with a different device. Could we use a tablet? Could we use the iPad? Could we use some other computing device? Or do we return to a previous model of rolling carts by department with a lab, similar to what we were doing back in 2003? Some of the options, again, state funding. Anticipated cost, this was before I received the revised number, sorry, $150,000 per year for 1 laptop per student, supplemented with a computer lab in a common location and additional spares. It has the highest cost, obviously, but it also has the highest level of functionality. Looking at a tablet program, if this were based on a 16-gig iPad, which is an entry-level iPad, we'd be looking at $97,500 roughly for 1 tablet per student, supplemented. That number includes additional computers such as a full iMac lab and Chromebooks and some additional buyout, some older MacBooks, in order to supplement. There are things that the tablet can't do, and there are some classes that use the resources that we just couldn't do with a tablet. Excuse me. But that number there includes the supplemental technologies that would be required in order for those things to function. So you have reduced costs even with the supplemental devices, and we're evaluating the functionality. And then the non-one-to-one, which is roughly $46,000 a year, which gives you a computer lab, 6 laptop carts, which would be shared. It has the lowest cost. It also has the lowest level of functionality, and it involves the loss of some previous investments. As an example, we've invested curriculum resources that require or that anticipate that a student will have a device available to them. Excuse me, in this model, we would lose that. And with 600 students in a school, to share roughly 120 devices or 150 devices with 600 kids involves significant reduction in their abilities to access that technology. So the question is, one of the big questions, I think, is the tablet a viable alternative? It's not as capable as a full laptop, but would it meet our needs if we look at our functional requirements and not get caught on which device do we want, but which device would meet the functional requirements? One of the knocks on the iPad in particular, the criticisms in the early 3 years ago, was that it's a great device for consuming content, but it's not a content creation device, right? That was what everybody was saying. It didn't have a camera, didn't have apps that would allow you to generate movies and things like that. The device is making huge strides rapidly, and I think that schools that have one-to-one iPad deployments are now saying that, that's much less of a concern for them. We did take a group of staff down to Burlington, Massachusetts to visit their high school where they have a one-to-one iPad deployment supplemented with things like Chromebooks and computer labs, and they seem to have a very viable curriculum with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, but they have a lot of things in place that make it successful. Booth Bay Harbor, just down the road, has a great one-to-one iPad deployment at their high school. We'll be taking a group there in the not-too-distant future so we get an opportunity to see what they're doing. Excuse me. And currently we have 10 iPads for Morse staff to sort of test drive, because there are a lot of staff who are saying to me, I don't know whether it's a good option. I'm not sure if it's something we could work with, because they just don't have experience or familiarity with the device. So we bought some so that they could have an opportunity to try them out. And now I'll turn it over to Amanda Knowles, teacher at Morse High School.
Hi, as Dean said, my name is Mandy Knowles. I am the Academy teacher at Morse High School, so I teach math and science to the Academy students. And this year I'm also teaching a section of psychology, which has been really fun. So Dean asked me to talk a little bit about the drawbacks and kind of the benefits of the one-to-one program at Morse, just from a teacher's perspective. So I will do that, and it kind of ends up being a little plug for one-to-one, but because I think it's awesome. So my background is I taught in Tennessee for a little while before I came up here, both at a middle school and a high school. And they did not have a one-to-one program there. Their technology was very limited, and the students there, I think, were at a very big disadvantage because of that. And so when I came up here, it was just, it's kind of an amazing thing that we allow our students to have this device and to take it home and to, kind of personalize a little bit, but to use it, as something that really advances their technological skills. I think we talk a lot about how we can show students what they're learning in school can be applied to real life, and the one-to-one program really does that without us even really trying. We're teaching students how to use technology, how to use it responsibly, how to integrate it into their personal life, and that's just by them having it and letting them take it home. And so I think that going backwards from a one-to-one program to a rolling laptop card is a huge disadvantage for our students. With that said, I don't know if I'm really sold on whether or not we need laptops or tablets, but I think the one-to-one program is a really big benefit for our students. From a teacher perspective, I cannot imagine trying to teach without a one-to-one program. Most of my curriculum is based on technology. We use it every day in every class that I have. I teach 3 different sections of math. I teach biology, ecology, earth science, and psychology. And so my students are expected to bring it every day, and we use it every day. I think it allows me to provide them with a variety of activities. I think that they're more engaged. Yes, sometimes they're more distracted, but they're teenagers. So, I mean, and I think that's part of the classroom management, strategy too. That's something that we need to work on as students. But I think overall for me as a teacher, it's been a huge benefit. We do, in one of my Algebra 1 classes, we are doing a standards-based instruction, and so I have students who are taking Algebra 1, but they're kind of all over the map, and technology allows me to let them do that. On my website, it's linked in with different videos, with different activities, and so I can have I had a student join today who's on Unit 1 in Algebra 1. I have a student who's on Unit 15. And without them having their own device, I don't think that would be possible. Let's see, so that's my kind of my sales pitch for one-to-one. I think I think there are drawbacks too. I think students can be distracted, but I think as teachers, it's our responsibility to teach them how to be responsible consumers of technology. And I think if they don't learn that in high school, college is really not the place to be learning how to use technology. I think you should know that ahead of time. And so we're really preparing them ahead of time for what lies ahead. I think one of the barriers that we do have as a staff is kind of maybe our school culture a little bit. I was part of the trip that went to Burlington, and they do a great job of integrating technology into everything that they do. And so it's not technology day in biology class, or, ooh, let's pull out the laptops today. It's integrated into everything, so it really becomes part of their school culture. And I'm not sure that we have that at Morse right now. I think it's more of a let's pull it out, let's use it, we use technology, maybe let's put it away for a little while and kind of rejuvenate a little bit. And so students at that point, maybe they do get distracted because they're not using it as part of their everyday curriculum. So I think that, regardless of what device we choose to use, I think that we need maybe a little rejuvenation in terms of school culture. And along with that, additional professional development for staff and some training on how to train our students and how to be responsible consumers of technology. So overall, I really think that the benefits really outweigh the drawbacks, but that's just my opinion. Does anybody have any questions? I kind of just threw all that out there. Yeah.
I do. You mentioned a couple of times that by having one-to-one, you advance technological skills. Mm-hmm. What do you give me some specific examples of what kind of skills are being advanced?
I think, at least I'll just give you some examples from my classes. I think that they are they're better able to manage their time in using their technological skills. Some of the skills that we use, they're creating PowerPoint presentations, they are creating movies, they are doing web quests, they're doing all sorts of different things that I don't know that we would be able to cram into 40 to 50 minutes in a computer lab. And so we are able to do stuff in class that then they can kind of take home and work with. In terms of, like, for example, my math class, what they're allowed to do is kind of learn some of the skills on their own through videos, through online practice and that sort of thing. So they're using technology to incorporate into the regular curriculum instead of just maybe learning to do, write programming or whatever you do in a computer class. So I also didn't mention this, but something that I really liked about Burlington as well is they had a very strong infrastructure in terms of the computer support staff that I really don't know that we have here. They had a whole class that was dedicated to helping students run a computer help desk, which teaches them the technological skills that they need, but then it helps them help their peers, which is something that I really liked about Burlington when we saw that. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've heard from some parents and some people in the community, and I'll be honest, I've wrestled with it a little bit myself. There's a huge financial investment that we make into the technology. What would you say to someone who's saying, that's a luxury that we can't afford? Our SAT scores, have they changed dramatically since we've done that? That's something that's been mentioned to me. What are these kids getting? Our graduation rates haven't gone up. So, why should we be putting all this money into technology when we're not sort of, I guess, getting, the bang for the buck?
Right.
That, people in the community would like to see?
I think maybe the problem is that we're not using the technology that we have appropriately. I mean, every kid has a laptop, but do we really use it to its fullest potential in class? And I don't know that that's the case right now. I think I try to use it a lot. I don't know that I can speak for every teacher. I think some teachers are still on the mindset that, this doesn't really apply to my class, and maybe let's use it as a word processor. And so I think to really get the bang for the buck, I think you really need to invest into some staff training and really make it a focus for the district that, yes, we need to be focused on technology, because I don't think we're using it to its fullest potential. I think that's part of the problem.
Is there any possibility of, I don't know how many of our students, have this option, if they have their own laptops, would that be where's Dean? And, do you guys see that as something that could be an option? That if, my child has their own laptop, that I have provided for them instead of the school having to do it? Could there be any cost savings in that sense? Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah, well, certainly. And there are schools that are looking at it. It's called a Bring Your Own Device, BYOD. And the challenges that you run into with that really have a lot to do with budgeting. As an example, how many do you purchase? When we buy them on a 4-year lease, it becomes very difficult to take a stab at how many kids, especially with the number of students that come into Morse and leave Morse, is really hard for us to take a guess at how many of them will decide to bring their own device and use them. And the other issue that you run into is an equity piece and also a planning piece for a teacher. If they can't know what resources are available for their students to use, it becomes really difficult for them to plan a lesson or an assignment, not knowing whether you're going to have this device and this person has something else. So, not to say that it can't be done. There are some limitations associated with it, but that's part of the discussion.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Dean did let me check out all 10 iPads this week, so I'm very excited about that. So my biology class is doing a kind of a test run for those. So we did our first kind of unit with it today, and it went well. It went very well. I've never seen them so quiet in my life. So I don't know, again, I'm not really wed to the has to be a laptop, has to be an iPad kind of thing, but I really feel strongly about the one-to-one aspect of the technology at the high school. So.
Just wondering if representatives might have a comment or observation.
Sure.
How the program works, whether it's successful from your perspective.
Well,
Not to put you on the spot.
I'm happy to answer that. I've had a mixed experience with the MLTI one-to-one program. I would say that if I had to rate it as positive or negative, I would rate it as positive. I've noticed, and I just mentioned this to Mr. Barber, certain teachers are definitely better than other teachers at implementing technology and using that. I don't think that's entirely the teacher's fault. I think part of that is kind of content and subject oriented. For example, I think it's a lot easier to implement a laptop into a biology class than it is for an Algebra 1 class. That's something I've noticed a lot, that in one class I'll use my laptop quite a bit and I'll be able to use it in a lot of different ways. In science I can write a lab report, I can analyze data with different software, I can do research for a paper online, and then I get to my English class and really all I'm doing with it is just using the basic word processing function. That varies. There are concerns. Students say this too. They feel like the technology gets abused and misused sometimes. Social media, cyberbullying. There was a whole ordeal with Twitter not too long ago that we experienced here. That can be frustrating sometimes. I think in general at school, Morse does a really good job of making sure that technology is used appropriately. Teachers, I think, are really on top of that, and they do a good job of keeping students on task. And to me, that's really important, because I think it's a lot less about having the devices than how we're able to implement them and use them within the school setting that makes a difference. I also had it in middle school, and I thought that they were significantly helpful in middle school. I've noticed now too, I have my own laptop and I own an iPad. Some students, of course, are not as fortunate as me in that regard, but I do a lot of stuff on my own personal computer at home, and that I bring around with me. So sometimes I don't necessarily need the MLTI MacBook, but I'm lucky enough to be able to afford my own laptop. So I know I'm not really speaking from a representative perspective there, but I've talked enough. Monica, sure.
You want to say something?
Well, oh God. I would just have to say most of what I have to say for the MLTI laptops are positive. Speaking from schoolwork point of view, trying to get like a high school curriculum and all the things that we have to do done in the computer lab would be so much more difficult, because I work and what I have time for to do after school, I have to work, and so after school I cannot stay here and in a lab and get my work done and all the things that I need to get done. So being able to take the laptop home is very, very helpful. It's helpful. I cannot speak. Sorry. It's just helpful, I think, for myself, and I think I speak for a lot of the students at Morse, that being able to take it home, just being able to have something there to help us extra outside of the classroom is a bonus.
Great. I think earlier you were talking about bang for buck and is it a good investment and that sort of thing, which is a great segue into this concept called the productivity paradox, which is something that Fortune 500 companies have studied for years, decades, which is we make this large capital investiture in computer technologies, but it didn't change everything. Like, how come it didn't fix all of our problems? Well, it's just a tool. It's only as good as the work that we do with it. There are classrooms, there are lessons that will be significantly enhanced and made better with the use of the technology, and there are some where that computer is never going to improve on that lesson. There are just some things where it's not applicable. But I think what it does have the potential to do is expand the opportunities for the students, okay? The ability for this student to be able to have a job and then get access to the device afterwards. This is we're only in year really 3 of MLTI at Morse, right? They didn't go out until Thanksgiving of the first year, and we've just started the second semester. So if you look at the available time, we really haven't even had them for the full 4 years yet. What's going to be kind of interesting coming up is a survey that was done of staff who teach 7 through 12. And I think that what you'll begin to see are some interesting changes over the course of time with the device. But I think it's a great question. You know, I mean, we make these investments, and are we seeing change? Are we seeing improvement? And very honestly, technology is a hard one around that. Now, we're going to be visiting a classroom later this week that sounds really, really intriguing to me. There's a teacher over in Woolwich who's using e-text for an algebra class. And what that teacher is doing is taking NWA scores for students, identifying targeted areas that they need help, and then using Khan Academy and this e-text, which is a product that we purchased, in order to give differentiated instruction to a group of students. That's pretty exciting stuff. That is something that we couldn't just do with my once-a-month trip to the computer lab. I mean, that has the potential to really make a difference. But we have not yet invested the time or the money sustained over time to see that kind of change take place systemically. So this is a survey that went out to all staff who teach in grades 7 through 12. Okay, this question says, how often do you use your MacBook to perform the following functions? And what you'll see, this is pretty basic stuff. I don't think there are too many surprises here. Over here, in the first column, the grade 9s through 12, over on the right-hand side are 7 through 8, okay? As you can see, almost everybody uses it to develop instructional materials. A lesser number conducting research, quick facts in the classroom. I think that's really interesting right there, because that speaks to being able to, something comes up in class and you want to look something up and you have the resources available to do it right then and there. The ability for a teacher in that classroom to say, okay, Kyle, that's a great question. I don't have the answer. Could you look it up for us, right? I mean, that's the sort of thing that we're not going to be able to do otherwise. And then specifically classroom instruction and differentiation. That surprised me, quite honestly, differentiated instruction. You would think that the laptop would play specifically to the ability to give us differentiated instruction, which is what I was just talking about with the gentleman over in Woolwich. I think that this is a much it's a skill that is attained over time. The ability to use the device, to know how to use the device, and then how to use the device, to differentiate, to make it different for every student. I also think that that really speaks to the need of teachers to have time to do that. The ability, even though the device provides you with a mechanism to provide differentiated instruction, it still takes a lot of time to plan that, to find out where are those resources, where can I find that for this particular student or that particular student, and the ability to have the time to go out, to try them, to make sure that they're really good resources. I think that speaks to our staff's need to have time to research that and put those together. Question 5 was a simple, straightforward question. Do you think that teaching in a one-to-one environment has resulted in your being teaching in a more student-centered manner? In grades 9 through 12, you can see, do you agree, disagree, neither agree? And you'll see that there's some difference over the course of time in grades 7 and 8 and 9 through 12. Most of our teaching staff in grades 7 and 8 have anywhere from 7 to 10 years of experience in a one-to-one environment. In grades 9 through 12, most of our staff have just the last 3 years in a one-to-one environment. Many, many years of experience, lots of experience with technology, but in a one-to-one environment, fewer. Stop me if I'm going too fast through any of this. And then we start to get into, this is more of an administrative function, you know, what do you use it for? Recording grades, managing student information. I don't think there's really any surprises here. Other than I was kind of surprised to see that only half the staff maintain a web page or a blog for their classes. I think that would be a reasonable goal for us to take a look at in the future, increasing that so that everybody has a blog or a web page or some sort of an extension. Some people use Moodle. I know actually Mr. Joyce in the back here uses Moodle very effectively. We had a long conversation about it a couple years ago. Uses it as a great way for his students to maintain, even when they're absent, access to the class, what they're teaching, what's being taught that day, what the assignments are, where are the resources, where can they find the materials, that sort of thing. And others are as well. But that would be a good goal for us to improve on. And then this really begins to get into how the device is used. Now this question asked, what are the benefits of one-to-one from the teacher's perspective? And the way that this is organized is I've lumped together the agree and strongly neither agree nor disagree, and then disagree or strongly disagree over there on the far right. And you'll see it's a number slash number. So that's the percentage in 9 through 12, and then the percentage in 7 through 8. And I'll just leave you for a moment to take a look at that. I think this is where you really begin to see a difference between those of our faculty who have had the ability to use the device for up to 3 or 4 years versus our staff who have had the ability to use the device for 8 to 10 years. If you look as an example up here, there isn't really that much of a difference. Explore topics in greater depth, right? 76.2% in grades 9 through 12 say that, 80.7 in 7 and 8. But over here, you see 9.5% of the faculty still disagree or disagree strongly with that at the high school level, and yet no one would say that at the middle school level. I think those numbers are kind of interesting. It's not a right or wrong. I think it's just a progression, quite honestly. I think it's a time and grade familiarity with the device and with that teaching model. And I think there are some significant differences, too, between teaching at the middle school levels is thematic, project-based, expeditionary. There are some differences there that might lend itself to using the technology. It's not driven, perhaps, quite as much by content. Individualized instruction, again, you can see basically what I'm pointing out is that as you go through these, you'll see this progression pretty much throughout. Almost everybody agrees that using the device is helpful to them and that they're more efficient, better able to differentiate, etc. There's still a significant number in the middle, and yet in the disagree column, very, very few people at the middle school level feel that the device isn't enhancing what they're doing. And then this question asks similarly of student work. What do you perceive as a teacher the benefits to the students? And I would point out that we do actually have a student survey, but we just haven't been able to get enough students yet to take it to make the data valid. We only have 200 kids so far who've taken it. So any help you can provide me with that would be great. Because I think it's important. We actually did put the survey together. We'd love to get as much feedback as possible on it. Anyway, students work harder. You guys might find this interesting. I don't know. At the high school, you can see 35.8 people think that, or percent, think that students work harder. At the middle school level, 71% think their students work harder. I don't know what's true. I mean, it's not a function of right or wrong. It's just these are people's perceptions of how the device is being utilized. 33% at the high school level think that kids aren't working harder, and yet only 3.2% at grades 7 and 8. Do we really think, I mean, is it that different? Is it so dissimilar in grades 7 and 8 versus 9 through 12? It might be, and if it is, we should be looking at what's working. Why is it that in grades 7 and 8, this program is pretty successful, and not to say that it's not at the high school, but why are these numbers so much higher? I think we could learn from that. I think we could take a look at what's being, what successes are they having at the middle school, what successes are they having at the middle school level, I should say, and what successes are they having in other one-to-one schools. Any questions about this information?
Any idea? I mean, the differences are fairly dramatic. I mean, this
Yeah.
significantly so. And have you, aside from your speculation that it just has to do with sort of time on task as the factor that drives the difference in response, any other suggestions?
Oh, yeah, I have lots of ideas on it.
Because, for example, I mean, you can't simply say that this group of teachers has worked with it for more years than others.
Sure.
Because you always have turnover among that staff. I mean, there are new faculty
Sure.
at middle school every year. There are experienced faculty at the high school who've actually used technology longer than the faculty at the middle school, because of turnover.
Yeah, but I think that statistically, I'm not sure that it's a, but regardless, your point is taken. When we rolled out one-to-one at the 7th and 8th grade level, those schools had a 2-year window in which they knew that rollout was coming. Teachers were given the laptops in a year before the students received them, and they were able to take staff development for a full year prior to students actually getting the devices and having them deployed locally. At the time that we rolled that out in the grades 7 and 8, we invested a tremendous amount of professional development time. We brought in, at that time, Jim Moulton was an independent educational consultant. We brought Jim in for several days. It was a sustained, consistent effort over time. It occupied, there was a component of technology and preparation for this change in everything that was done. It was included in staff meetings, it was included in trainings, it was included in curriculum work. It was a significant undertaking even before we rolled it out. And at the high school, they haven't been given that same level of support. In the first year that we rolled out one-to-one at Morse High School, we also rolled out at the same time an integrator position. That position was specifically earmarked to help staff and students in grades 7 through 12 to make the transition to using one-to-one technologies. After 1 year, unfortunately, the budget was such that we had to eliminate that position. So at the same time that we provided all of these resources, we reduced the amount of support that was available. If you look at successful one-to-one implementations across the nation, you will see that they have sustained effort, they have significant leadership, they have time to work with one another, time to look at best practices. It's built into their day. It's part of the culture. If you look at Burlington, if you look at Booth Bay, it's not like one day a year is our technology PD day. It's part of, PD for technology isn't just like, okay, today's technology. Everything they do, the technology is just part of what they're doing. It's not the focus, it's the enhancement, it's the support for everything else. So they're focusing on their content and they're practicing their craft, and the technology is just one of the tools available to them, but it's always there. It's also part of their observations, it's part of their evaluations, it's part of their goal setting. There are lots and lots of really good examples available to us of successful one-to-one programs. And I think that a lot of that does come down to preparation, the resources being available, and time in those environments. I don't think that our teachers in grades 9 through 12 have had anywhere near the opportunities that our staff did in 7 and 8. And this was the final question on that survey. Student laptops have become such an important tool. I can't imagine teaching without them. And as you can see in grades 9 through 12, 64.3% of the faculty said that, to 28.5% disagreeing. So even with our growing pains and how we could have done things better or differently, faculty feel pretty strongly at a greater than 2 to 1 that it's been successful and they'd like to continue it in some way. And then this was my final, looking at common traits to one-to-one success. I think you have to have leadership at all levels. You have to have a sustained effort. One of the things that we just haven't been as successful with is making technology pervasive and not like some insidious thing, but just something that is an enhancement. Like, it's part of what we do, right? I mean, I'm sure we all use technology in our personal lives, whether it's to look up a recipe, whether it's to check the stocks or the sports or whatever it is. We access information all the time. And yet, when we come into school, we don't necessarily do the same thing. So looking at professional development, staff meetings, a lot of places are where technology is really successful. A small portion of every staff meeting is for staff to share, what are you doing? What's working well? What are you frustrated with? Best practices. Integrating components into observations and evaluations. A commitment. One of the things I think we haven't really done, as an example, we want to talk about some of the inhibitors in 9 through 12. We're having this conversation right now about, should we have one-to-one, right? Well, I mean, if I were a teacher with really limited resources in terms of time and a large teaching load, and I wasn't sure that this program was continuing, I might not be willing to redesign my entire curriculum in order to make use of this device, not knowing if it's going to be around. I think that really is a legitimate impediment to adoption. I think that we need to have, not to say that doesn't mean that we should obviously evaluate it and tweak it and make it better, make sure that it's working for us. But I think that people need to have a commitment that they know it's going to be around, so that they're willing to invest themselves, their time, their resources into doing it. Staff have to play a really significant role in the process. If you look at the schools where this is working, they have regular meetings with the staff to talk about the technology, the deployment, how is it going, what do they need, what are they providing. They have a really healthy relationship talking about how the technology is being utilized, how to manage it, how to deploy it, how to maintain it, and adequate technical support. I think those things there are common to all good one-to-one programs. So, that's my presentation. Thank you. Sorry about the cold. Any questions?
We can go back up. Are there any more questions for Dean? As Patrick said, for the board, the purpose of this presentation is to give you an overview of where we stand in the district with technology, both in terms of devices, in terms of support, what level of professional development we offer, all those kinds of things. We will have a time later on to hear and discuss, where we see going with the one-to-one program at the high school in the future. So, regarding where we stand with district-wide with technology, are there any further questions for Dean?
2,000 devices that you listed, is that including like,
Here, can you speak?
of the 2,000 devices that you included in that list, does that include like printers, routers? So how many end user type devices do we currently have approximately? So a
Roughly
big,
1,600.
so that includes like laptops, iPads.
Yeah, laptops, iPads.
Okay.
Yep.
Are there any other questions for Dean? Dean, one thing I heard you saying, and it was one of the questions that I had prior to the presentation, my question was just a general one, you know, what do we have for staff training or professional development? But as you make proposals to the board in the upcoming budget, will you be taking into consideration, will professional development and technical staff also be a component of that?
Yes, it's been,
Yeah.
it is, and it's one of the discussion items that we've had at the administrative team as we evaluate different priorities within the district, looking at technology staffing and technology integration, because really they're two fairly distinct disciplines. Technology support and technology integration are really different. Technology integration is really curriculum, and curriculum is what I'll be driving these decisions.
Okay.
Before you walk away from the mic, where would you put in your judgment, where would you put your weight in terms of devices and technical support, professional support for instructional staff? So I mean, is it in terms of investment, you know, if you have fewer devices, less, you know, stuff that is somewhat dated, more technical support, more professional support for staff, do you maximize impact, or do you go for top shelf stuff but not have the professional development?
Yeah, I think that balance is really important, and quite honestly, it does us no good to buy lots of really neat stuff, but not be able to support it well, and not be able to teach people, provide them with the opportunities to explore and to use it well. That would not be a wise investment. So I think that we have to achieve that balance between, you know, this may be the best device, and this may be the most expensive device, but if it means that we can't staff it adequately, or we can't then balance our needs at the other schools, then that may not be the right choice for us, for this district. So we may have to look at a lesser device, as long as it meets our functional requirements, so that we can adequately support it and lead and make really substantive change with it.
Okay.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Dean. Yeah, that was quite an overview.
Could you are your charts available for us?
Oh, sure, yeah. I have the full survey as well.
Yeah, okay, great.
Patrick, just while we're on this, can you talk to the board a little bit about when we will have that opportunity to talk about?
Yeah, I think you'd have it, number one, your first opportunity would be at the budget presentations to the Finance Committee that hopefully all of you can come to and attend. And then after that, it would be the budget discussions that we would have at the board level.
Okay. All right, and I, again, because the high school situation is such a big one, and it's such a big ticket item, I would encourage folks from the high school to come to these meetings and give us some feedback one way or the other in terms of, has that program been beneficial, has it not been beneficial, and is it something worth continuing to fund? Because, you know, to go full bore, we're talking just for the devices, $150,000 price tag, and that does include professional development that Dean's emphasizing and more technical staff, which I think is something that we need. So anyway, consideration. All right, we will move on to committee reports. We'll begin with the Woolwich Building Committee report. Patrick?
Yeah, I'll be brief, just two quick items. We have a meeting this Thursday, and we'll be focusing on the heat issue, which has gotten much better, but we will be talking about the additional strainers with the state as well as with our contractor, and hopefully have some resolution to that on Thursday, as well as the wood chip bin that we talked to you about before, that we have a design that we think will work, and that work would be done, then redesigning of it would be done this summer at no cost to the district. So those are the two major issues that hopefully we'll have resolution to on Thursday of this week. That's it.
Any questions for Patrick on the Woolwich Building Committee? Okay, we'll move on to Facilities Committee, item 10.2. Bill, here, can you?
The committee is now in receipt of the draft study done by Harriman Associates. And the last meeting, we started some rather in-depth discussion of not so much the recommendations, but the facilities themselves, their strengths, their weaknesses, their enrollment. It's a work in progress, and the final report, I'm sure, will be a little more conclusive and have some options for us and some alternatives that we can discuss at length, but I'm not quite ready for that yet. The other thing that came out of it, and it was a continuing discussion of our last board meeting, was around the facility here, this complex at Morse High, its needs. And we, again, reinforced to the superintendent that we would like an engineering study so that we'll have some professional support for what we can observe and what Dave Richards is bringing forth to us in terms of the facilities here and some of the rather dramatic needs in some areas and other needs in other areas. So it's a work at March 12th, next meeting. Be there or be square.
Thank you. Any questions for Bill? I just want to emphasize that the Morse facility is a priority. We've spoken to Patrick. If there's any way within the existing budget that we can get a pre-study done to give us an independent assessment of where we stand with the facility, because that is a conversation that needs to begin. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are working on that. Finance Committee report. Steve?
Thanks. The Finance Committee met and discussed, essentially had 3 or 4 things on the agenda. One was a discussion of pre-K and pre-K options. So several scenarios were presented by the administration, which we reviewed. The committee had some questions which we think would help us, guide us in a decision, or guide us toward a recommendation that we might make to the full board. One thing that we did request of Patrick was that Rosalie have an opportunity to present as one of the cost centers at the budget meetings in front of the Finance Committee, and I trust she's scheduled for that. I'm not sure when. So we'll continue to get more information on pre-K. We also discussed facilities and Morse. And I think from the finance side of it, we were primarily interested in getting some information on bonding options and how we might go forward in terms of establishing a timeline on how we would need to go forward with the bond if and when there was a set of plans brought forward that required bond funding. So there's as you and as Bill noted, I mean, there's no proposal in front of us, but we were just trying to get information on what funding options would be available. We are also going to be meeting, or some members of the committee are going to be meeting with the business office staff on Wednesday to review the accounting system and budgeting system that the district uses to prepare its budget documents. And I'll reiterate, as has been said three or four times already, I guess, starting March 4th, the committee will be meeting with administrators from various cost centers. There are 2 meetings, March 4th And I think that kicks off at 7:30 and in the morning, and then March 11th, which is the following Monday, again at 7:30. And we do encourage as many board members as can to attend those presentations.
Where will they be made?
They're going to be in the, that's a good question.
Yeah,
Is it
central office.
Central office.
One of the conference rooms
Central,
downstairs.
yeah, right.
Probably room, we've been meeting in room B
yeah.
downstairs in the central office. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Are there any other questions for Steve on the Finance Committee? Okay, we'll move on to 10.4, Policy Committee Report. Dave?
Yeah, the Policy Committee met on the 14th. And again, with Dean, we went over policy issues involving electronic communication devices. I mean, where there is an explosion of technology, policies will follow shortly behind. And he will attempt to update, I guess would be the appropriate word, our electronic communication devices policies, and present them first, of course, to Patrick, who will then in turn provide them to the SEA for their review, as the electronic devices maintained by the faculty, but personal devices are affected as well. We have 4 policies to read for the first time tonight, because 2 of them that are on the schedule were not addressed at our last meeting. So we'll have an opportunity to do those, as well as the 2 additional policies on student discipline and the standards of ethical and responsible behavior.
Okay. We'll move on to item 11.1, or 11.0, excuse me, Superintendent's Report. Patrick?
Yeah, just after every sports season, we usually just give an update on some good news. So boys and girls swim teams did well again this year, maybe not to the standard that they typically do, but they finished 3rd in the KVAC championship. Cheerleading team finished 11th for the state of Maine. Boys basketball team qualified for postseason. I think it was the first time in the last 4 years. They had a playoff game down at Wells. And we had 7 students this year participate in indoor track in a collaborative effort with Brunswick High School. One thing I think I emailed you, but we're talking a lot about school construction, talking a lot about this facility here, as well as our elementary schools. But I did go up a week and a half ago and testified, along with the Mount Ararat Superintendent, SCD 75, regarding trying to raise the debt ceiling limit for new construction projects or renovation projects. And the Education Committee did unanimously approve that, going from $116 million annually to $126. Now it would go to the full legislative body to be approved. It's positive news. Maybe more projects will be helped by this, because we're number 11 on the list, and Mount Ararat is number 7. And they're only funding the first 6, or helping to fund the first 6. It doesn't necessarily mean that that extra $10 million will be spent. It has to obviously be approved to be spent. It just means that the debt service limit, or cap, is at 126 instead of 116 if that goes through. And there are other people, like I think it's Justin Alphon from Portland, also has a bill in regarding if districts do not want to wait for state money to help their building projects. If a district decided to do it locally and got that approved, would you still remain on the list? And so that, after a couple of years, if you're still on that list, then that money obviously could be put back to the district. So there's various bills with school construction up there. Obviously there's not a whole lot of money to go around, but it was a good process, and I think, and Kyle and I have been talking, Kyle's our legislative liaison, the more we can be up there, not on a consistent basis because we need to be here, but the more we can get RSU1 and Morse in particular when it comes to facility, the better off we're going to be. That's all.
Okay. I apologize. We got into this meeting and I forgot to mention that there is an adjustment to the agenda. We will be going back into executive session at the end of the meeting to continue to discuss personnel issue. So I want to just add that before I forget. Okay, financial report. That was emailed to us, I think, and I didn't print that out, so.
Yeah, I talked with...
Was it on the table? Sure. Wait a second. I'll just swallow that up. All right, Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, I talked with Ruthie last week about this. It's not that much different than your last report that you received, the December report. She was at the meeting. She talked to you about our concerns regarding special education instruction and special education tuition. You can see on the top under expenditures, about 132,000 there is what's being projected to have left over. Again, that encumbered line may make you a little confused, but that is where Ruthie and Deb are projecting what we would spend. Included in that is approximately $500,000 that we've gone in and put a freeze on certain lines in the district because of our concern about the Medicare and other unexpected costs that we've had this year. So again, our hope is that we can kind of, hopefully through the spring, that we can let up on that freeze a little bit. But again, that 132, and the hope would be that we have some things earmarked under that encumbered, and we don't expect to spend that $500,000. Down at the bottom, everything is pretty much exactly the same as last month as far as revenues go. So again, up top, it may look a little dismal, that 132,000, or it may look close, and we are still going to continue to be concerned about that, but within that encumbered amount is the amount that we've kind of held firm about when it comes to the freeze.
Are there any questions for Patrick on the finance report? For me, again, I thought at the last meeting this was addressed. Under special ed instruction and special ed tuition, those two lines, if I'm reading this correctly, in terms of what was budgeted and what will be spent, they'll be well over budget, almost $400,000. Now, I thought part of that $400,000 was made up of the Providence situation.
Yeah,
and that once that was resolved and that went back in as, well, I guess it would be revenue, it would offset some of those costs. But are we really?
It does, under special education instruction.
Yeah.
If you go back to your report from December,
okay.
I believe you will find that was $350,000, $360,000. And so that 190 has been credited under special education instruction.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, we had a situation that happened this summer, fall, where it was related to special education. It was a tuition settlement that we were involved with. I mean, there's only so much detail I can give you here, but
sure.
There's some extenuating circumstances. But the biggest one, obviously, is that main care issue. So, and as we go through the budget process, when Sharon talks to you next Monday, you'll hear, and Deb and Ruthie, they'll talk to you about how we need to budget more for that 30% of main care that we haven't had to pay before.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to old business, review of board goals. The past few months, because of a time issue, and we're facing it again, we've kind of overlooked board goals, but somebody mentioned to me the other day that it's not a bad idea for us to at least go through these on a regular basis. So again, our board goals for 2012-2013. Our first goal was to focus on the health curriculum and the potential of establishing a middle school program at both Bath Middle and Woolwich. I expect at some point we will get a presentation on this, and this will also be part of the budget discussion during the meetings that are presented to the Finance Committee, and we'll talk about that a little later. You all received an email from Patrick that detailed some of the district-wide priorities, and this was in there, maybe not necessarily where we had wanted it. Number 2 was a resolution of the funding formula discussion. The board intends to focus on this process and create some level of finality before the first of the year or the end of the year. As you know, we've got 3 meetings coming up district-wide. We have a referendum in the spring to hopefully resolve this funding formula discussion, cost-sharing discussion. Our third goal was to revisit the staff evaluation process. Is it in place? Is it being implemented across the district? And is it effective? We had a presentation early on in the year that essentially answered the first 2 questions. We'll revisit it again towards the end of this year to see if it's effective. Our fourth goal was to gain feedback on the new Morse schedule. Again, we'll have a presentation on that in the spring. Our fifth was to establish a board schedule. That's been done. You should all have that in your folders now. As it says, the intent here is to give the board as well as the public a snapshot of how, also conduct a board meeting prior to the budget process that delivers a state of the district to the board. We had that state of the district board meeting. I was disappointed at the lack of public that attended that. I think it was really beneficial to the board, gave us a real good sense of where we stand as a district. It's just unfortunate more public members didn't get to participate in that.
And I will, on number 5, I don't believe that I sent it out to the full board. I think I shared it with Tim and Julie in the fall, a draft of that Vita helped work on as far as, just a schedule of items that need to be attended to, voted on every year as a board, so that, either by state law or other things. So I'll get that out to you tomorrow.
Okay, great. Number 6, the board workshop. That was something that we did early on in the year, and I think that we'll reap benefits from that as we go through the budget process. I think that was really beneficial. And then the final thing, develop additional means to develop public relations within the district and our community. We haven't spent a lot of time on that. I know we're going to dedicate some time to that in the spring, but I feel we've fallen maybe a little short on that one. We may develop some methods in the spring, but it didn't help us during this particular school year. So I just thought I'd take a moment and read through those 7 board goals just to kind of refresh the board and bring you back to speed on where we stand with that. Okay, we'll move on to item 13.0, new business. We have a retirement and a resignation under 13.1. Patrick, do you want to give us some details on that?
Yeah, just an FYI for you, but I'd like to thank both of them. First one is retirement, Barbara King. She's most recently a BMS secretary in the main office, and she's been with us for 30 years in the district. So I'd like to thank her for everything she's done for us. And then resignation, Kyle Jongerton found a job that's much closer to home in the Portland area, and we also thank him for what he's done for our technology department and also for Morse High School here when he was teaching.
So thank you both. Patrick, are we looking at candidates to replace Kyle?
Yes, Dean, I think, met today with some of his technology people to look through the resumes and packets, and should be interviewing, I think, next week.
Okay, great. All right, on to item 13.2. I wanted to have a little bit of a budget discussion, and I think this was prompted by some comments that came up during the Finance Committee meeting and also a conversation that Steve and I had. I wanted to go over a little bit about the process, the timeline, and priorities. One of the things that we noticed at the last Finance Committee, we had, at a previous board meeting, we had talked about extensively about some folks felt strongly about the pre-K program. And the next step we felt was to turn that over to the Finance Committee and have them look at a few different options. The Finance Committee had 3 options presented to them, but ultimately that committee felt that its purview was only to react to the numbers, that unless it got a direction from the board, it wasn't going to make a recommendation on policy back to the board, which brought to our attention as we come into this next budget cycle, those 2 meetings that are going to be presented to the Finance Committee, the one on the 4th and the one on the 11th, the information that's going to be presented by those department heads, that's really information that the board needs. So first thing I want to do is encourage any and all board members that can make one or both of those meetings be there, because realistically those meetings are more geared towards the board and less geared towards the Finance Committee. Now there are a number of board members that do show up for the Finance Committee meetings, but those of you who don't, if you could make one or perhaps both of those meetings on the 4th and the 11th, I think it would help the board and it will help you as you make decisions about the budget going forward, because without getting that feedback from the department heads, you're sort of making decisions in a vacuum. So based on what I just said, I just want to open up the floor to a little bit discussion. Patrick, I don't know if you wanted to add to any of that.
No, I mean, what I put in your packet was just kind of a, I guess, a primer with a reminder of the schedule, those meetings starting next week, and also just so you can tell, and the overviews that will happen. You should have received today, if not first thing in the morning from Ruthie or from Deb, is what I would call the ADS spreadsheets, similar to what you received last year, the budget spreadsheets for each cost center that will be presented to you on the 4th, because it was important to get that out try to get it out a week in advance to you. And then the principals and the directors will be providing you with a 1 to 2 page overview of the goals for their building as well as their staffing, similar to last year. And then what we also sent you was just some, a start of the process of priorities year 1, 2, and 3 for you to kind of just mull over and as we come in and make presentations to you next week, that hopefully, and we're doing a little differently this year, is we're coming into next Monday, so don't be taken back by this, but we're coming in with our budget being quite a bit higher in certain cost centers, because we wanted to show you what we felt we needed, and then possibly work in a different direction this year if we need to scale some things back, but be real honest with you about what we feel we need to provide a quality education in this system. So you will, like Dean elaborated a little bit tonight about that, you're going to see in his technology budget about the infrastructure, about the possibility of some other things that are in there. And I think it's important for you to see that from the get-go, instead of us coming in possibly with saying we got to stay under a 2% increase and not giving you guys the full picture. Obviously, there obviously is a need between a balance between our needs and the needs and the expectations of taxpayers, and we certainly understand that.
Patrick, just a question.
Go ahead, Bill.
When the 4th and 11th, where is Rosalie going to fit in? Because the pre-K is a...
You should have received an updated schedule of this. If you didn't, we'll get it out to you tomorrow, but...
Did you send it out? No, I didn't. No, okay.
It's okay. Monday, March 4th, we have down pre-K is the last slot at 11:15.
At what time?
11:15.
11:15.
But we'll send out a fresh copy to you tomorrow.
Okay.
So, do the members of the board, is there anyone who thinks that they're not going to be able to make one of those meetings? And again, if you can't make the whole thing, if you could just show up for a portion, would be beneficial.
Is the anticipation, I heard 11:15, it's like 7:30 to noon on both of those days?
Yeah. Well, the email I sent to you was, I can find it again, is that first day would be, you'd be out of there by noon time.
Okay.
The second day, you should be out of there at 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Pending everything goes fine and you don't ask too many questions. Just kidding.
You know me. You're kicking me out. Okay.
All right. Are there any, Steve, did you want to add something?
I just want to say that, you know, this, I don't perceive this as the Finance Committee abdicating any of its responsibility. I think the Finance Committee can look at the integrity of the proposals to make sure the numbers make sense based on trends of spending, et cetera. But in terms of setting priorities and recommendations on what is to be funded, really are policy questions and questions that are more appropriate to the full board. And I think that's why, you know, Tim and Patrick have suggested that it is important for the board to come and to listen to the arguments and presentations that the administrators make on how they justify their budget number. The Finance Committee is working hard here, but it isn't our responsibility to decide whether or not pre-K, as an example, whether or not pre-K is a priority. That really is a board decision to make.
Any other comments or discussion?
Just, if I might add,
Go ahead, Steve.
I just to put out the idea also that, you know, it may well be that as you progress over the next couple of months in the budget cycle, that it might be worthwhile at that time and based on need to convene a special meeting of the board for you know, an in-depth, comprehensive look at the budget. Because again, one of the comments that Tim and I shared in our conversation was that sometimes the full board, the formal board meeting, such as this meeting, doesn't always lend itself to a detailed discussion of individual budget items, and maybe a workshop on the budget as the singular focus and purpose for that meeting gives the board a better opportunity to discuss among themselves and with the public what the budget.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think we do have workshops scheduled around the community, and in the past, a lot of those workshops have been, you know, dedicated to giving the public an opportunity to speak. What we end up doing is we sort of shortchange the board. We can't have real strong budget discussions in a board meeting because of the agenda that we have. So I think my plan is, at least for one of those early meetings, dedicate half of that to letting the board utilize it as a workshop and then open it up to the public, instead of us getting inundated with comments from the public before we've had a chance to really debate it. So we'll see how it goes, but those were some of the procedural changes we had discussed changing. So, all right. Anything else? Okay, we will move on to some policy items. First reading of item 14.0, first reading of policy CAA, School and District Handbook. This is not an action item. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at this? Are there any questions? Any comments? I had one comment. Under the mission statement, there were a bunch of items that we're talking about including in the handbook. I didn't know if it might be beneficial. I know it's something we spent a lot of time on a few years ago, including our wellness policy within the district handbook. So I'll throw that back to the policy group to kick that around, whether or not they feel it would be beneficial or just more information that we don't need. But
We have, of course, a separate wellness policy that's undergoing revision as we speak.
right. I just thought that under this handbook, the district handbook, we're including the attendance policy, we're including graduation requirements, we're including student responsibility for behavior, academic and conduct-related rules. Just thought maybe might be beneficial for the district to know, for everyone to know what our wellness policy is. But again, it might be too much information for a, a handbook.
Yeah, and these policies are strongly recommended, or these items are strongly recommended by Drummond Woodsum as the ones that you should have in there, and referencing your policy manual. You may not put everything in, but
Yep.
reference it. So it's about making it manageable, but including the things that we are recommended to have.
Sure. Any other questions, comments? Okay, we will move on to item 15, first reading of policy IJOA, trips and trip guidelines.
Yeah, I sent this out to the building principals, and I didn't hear much back, but after taking time to really dissect this myself, I have a few concerns. We're trying to be a little bit more comprehensive, but at the same time, there's some things that are in here that are a little bit too much. Like, for example, scheduled competition contests will be presented to you at the beginning of every year. Well, I don't know what our winter sports schedule is going to be until, the fall when the KVAC meets. There's certain things, our math team may qualify for something, and the debate club, I don't always know exactly what's going to come up. So that's tough to do. And then on, page 3, policies are only as good as they're enforced, and I just find that trip orientation near the end of it, talking about that everybody, chaperones included, will have some type of whatever you want to call it, orientation. And I think that can happen in many different fashions. I don't think it needs to happen where you bring a whole group in with the volunteers and everybody has to go through this extensive orientation and sign off that they've got this orientation. We don't want to discourage teachers from taking field trips and overnight trips. So from my point of view, we've got to do a little more work on this, but it's fine to have it obviously as a first reading tonight. So.
Did anyone else see anything in this policy?
Yeah, I was, looking at the section related to non-sanctioned trips, and I wondered if in requiring non-sanctioned trips to submit a request to the school before, I'm a little bit confused by what we're doing with non-sanctioned trips. If we are allowing them to put a poster up for something, for quote, a non-sanctioned trip, are we tacitly sanctioning the trip? Because we're allowing them to post that information in the school. So, what are we really accomplishing, and is there some legal exposure, some liability exposure by even allowing a quote-unquote non-sanctioned trip to like I say, to allow you know, the individuals who are sponsoring a non-sanctioned trip to use the school campuses as a way to promote the trip. Because to me, that's that's kind of like tacit approval. I mean, if it's a dangerous activity and you say, let's go rock climbing, well, it's a non-sanctioned trip. But on the other hand, if someone gets hurt in that, and the school was somehow involved in promoting that program, I think we have exposure. I just don't know why you would want that category even acknowledged.
We've got a disclaimer here, though.
Yeah.
It says all responsibility lies with the individuals or groups sponsoring or organizing. A non-sanctioned trip may not represent the school and/or RSU1 in any manner. I mean, we've got a disclaimer as part of it.
Yeah, but if
it is long, I agree.
I would just think if it's and I'll use the example of rock climbing. You know, if there's danger there, and we allow the poster to go up and say, you know, the poster says, you know, all high school kids ought to come rock climbing with us, and something happens to one of those kids, even whether you sanction the trip or not, the fact that the school, again, you know, tacitly allowed that to be advertised on school property would suggest to me that you might have some responsibility. But, I mean, I'll leave that to
well, but reference is made to recruitment, which actually includes advertising, and that's not permitted. So, in effect, we're saying recruitment and planning can't take place during instructional time.
Well, it says during instructional time. It doesn't say that the campus can't be used, because the last paragraph under that section says that individuals who wish to use the school for the purpose of publicizing trips or recruiting participants must submit a request following the same procedures.
Well, then I agree with you, because if there is tacit approval, so that should be struck, because actually you're actually denying, as you point out, what you said. That is, that you can't recruit, but now you're recruiting.
Well, you're not only recruiting, but by accepting, I would suggest that by acknowledging that this trip is going to take place, you assume some responsibility for what's going to happen on the trip. I mean, you know, and I don't want to carry this out forever, but if you reasonably look at this activity and say, boy, that's dangerous, and you don't say anything as a school administrator, you don't position yourself and say, well, you know, this is non-sanctioned, it has nothing to do with the RSU, but you're submitting a request to me to use, you know, the school grounds to advertise this trip, and it's clearly a dangerous activity, whatever it is, and you don't say anything to acknowledge that. I wonder if, you know, you're not.
How should that be addressed then?
Maybe you strike it. Maybe you strike the whole section on non-sanctioned trips. Why would the school be involved?
We can certainly follow up on it, but at the same time, it's not so much, at least in my experience, it hasn't been like rock climbing or dangerous trips. I mean, when we're asked a question whether we've been involved in that or not, the obvious answer would be no, because of the liability piece. Most of the time for school systems, it is teachers that may be affiliated with a organization where if they want to take students to a country, and you know, maybe their tickets are paid for as part of chaperoning this, you know, 10 students, but it's not affiliated with RSU1. Another example that happens here, but also happens in SAD 75, is the Freedom Tour. I mean, that is sponsored by the Bath YMCA. But so for things like that, like a teacher here that's trying to organize a group to go to France, for example, that happens during April vacation, that, you know, I think that's the purpose of this mostly, is those types of things where could they use, you know, something in our, in our building. We have all kinds of organizations that use our building, from adults down to kids, and for many different reasons. So it was kind of, I think it's more along those lines, talking to main school management, but I certainly can follow up with them.
Yeah, I think it's worth examining, send it back to the policy committee and make sure that you address that issue.
I worked in a school system where any posting of any advertising for any activity other than sanctioned activities required the permission and the signature on the poster of the building administrator. And it's still true to this day. You gotta bring it to the principal and get an approval and their signature on it before you can post it wherever. A very simple way of handling it.
Yep. Okay, any other comments, concerns about this policy? I just, mine, similar to Patrick's, on the first page, second paragraph, it says, trips need to be authorized by the RSU1 Board of Directors. I want to make sure that there's some language in there. I know there are some trips that occur prior to us giving approval. I want to make sure that there's some language that allows for that.
You're talking about prior approval now.
Right. Occasionally there are trips that occur, that come up and occur before our next board meeting, and yet those trips still happen without our authorization, or our authorization may come after the fact, but I want to make sure that there's language about that.
Well, we already say that the overnights and out-of-country trips need prior approval, don't we?
Yeah. The statement of purpose, I don't know if that's necessary. Field trip request shall also include outlining current standards and instructional activities that will be utilized during the trip. We have not done that in the past. I don't think we require an outline for standards and instructional activities that will occur during the trip. We'd probably strike that unless we feel it's necessary. Had the thing that you had picked up in the 1, 2, 3, well, under types of trips, under 1, 2, 3, that list of academic requisites outlined above, that's just a repeat of a statement that occurred in a prior paragraph, in the first paragraph. So I think that can be eliminated.
The committee should look at this with
Yeah.
an eye towards editing it and paring it down some. There is some redundancy. There's some things that probably really don't need to be there.
Right.
Because it is very long.
Okay, so we'll hand it back to the policy committee. All right, we will move on to...
Thank you for that.
Sure. Item 16.0, first reading of policy JK, student discipline. This is one we saw fairly recently.
There's been quite a discussion of the use of force. And I believe at the moment there is some discussion at the state legislative level over this issue. So if we approve it as it's currently written, we may need to review it after that legislative, if it results in any significant change passed as law.
Okay.
ACLU, everybody's involved up at the State House now in public hearings.
Are there any other comments or questions on this particular policy? The only thing, I just have to mention it, and I, again, throw it back to the policy committee, but it says the board expects the following principles to guide the development and implementation of school rules and disciplinary procedures, and then it lists those 4 items. Are those 4 items expectations that the board actually discussed or talked about? And is there anything in there that we're missing? So again, I'd look at A through D and see if we're leaving anything out. We'll move on to item 17.
Can I just add?
Sure.
On the second page, there's a statement, students with disabilities shall be disciplined in accordance with applicable federal and state law. There is federal law that
Absolutely.
that supersedes?
And it has to be distinct and separate.
And it supersedes
Yes.
any state law, specifically in the area
Absolutely.
of students with disability.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
presents real difficulties, but it is state and federal law.
Okay, any other questions about this policy? All right, we will move on to first reading of policy ABAA. School system commitment to standards for ethical and responsible behavior. Are there any questions or comments on this? I just had a couple. In the third paragraph, there's a line that says, the process for identifying such shared values will invite and include the participation of board members, school administrators, staff, parents, students, and the community. When does this occur? It's part of policy, but I can't see that that's ever been done. That last sentence, the board will direct the superintendent to develop a process to assess school system progress toward achievement of an ethical and responsible school culture. I'm not sure when we have done that.
I think to some extent it's boilerplate.
Yeah, the boilerplate stuff though is starting to, after we deal with these, it doesn't become our policy. This becomes policy of either the legal system or a district statewide. This opening paragraph, the school board believes. Who wrote this? Nobody on this board wrote this. So I don't know if we believe this or not. I would ask the policy committee to look at those items in particular.
On the policy committee, there are 2 board members, 3 now, 3 board members and 2 community members. So if there, we have to start someplace.
Yep.
I can't write these policies. You don't have the time to write these. So we have to start with Maine School Management typically, or other states. And so, by giving this first reading, Tim makes a good point, but this first reading is a way for you to weigh in. It can be done through email. It can be done, by picking up the phone and calling and further discussing which things you believe in, which you don't. In any policy, or not every policy, but a lot of policies, there's going to be a little bit of jargon there.
Yeah.
But
I just, again, the talk about responsible school culture, a lot of that work has been done in some of our specific schools. I know they focused specifically on school culture, West Bath, Woolwich. So I think some of that should make it into this policy because it's something that we do as a district. So, okay. I need a motion to extend the meeting beyond 8 o'clock.
So moved.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Steve. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of extending the meeting beyond 8 o'clock, raise your hand. Okay, we will move beyond 8 o'clock. Okay, we'll move on to item 18.0, public comment section. Sure.
I'll give up that for some of the stuff you've had before, some of you haven't, so I'm just going to some of this is
Thank you.
Again, I'm going to apologize up front, and I know Mr. Harkins doesn't like me to apologize ahead of time, but I'm up here to speak for myself and my family, and Some of the stuff you've heard before. I don't mean to offend anybody, that's the last thing I want to do, but I'm frustrated with the situation that we're in. So again, I'll start off. My name is Charlie Bingham, and I'm a resident of Woolwich. I have two students attending Woolwich Central School. I am back again asking you to get a health education in foreign language teacher at Woolwich Central School. I recently looked into the roles of the school board. Although you have many functions, the main function of the board is to represent the educational wishes of the community and what is in the best interest of our young people. Last year I gave you data, and this is also in the packet on the second sheet, of the cost efficiency of a health education. For every dollar you spend on health education, on average you'll save 18. I also have a petition that I gave you last year signed by over 150 residents of the RSU, including the principal and vice principal of Morse High School, 20 small business owners, the Bath Chief of Police, the Sheriff of Saginaw County, all of whom support getting health education back into our schools, K through 8. Secondly, after talking to the Maine Department of Education, they suggested checking Woolwich Central School's annual school approval report. And this is also in the packet there, I highlighted it in the certain questions that they asked Woolwich Central School. It's the thick packet at the very end. I found many statements in the report not true. If you look at numbers 1, 3, and 4, it says tasks completed for meeting standards in the Maine state learning results. This is not the case for health education in foreign language. I also have concerns about statements 11, 16, and 18. Again, the learning results are K through 8, or K through 12. You again talked tonight about going through a middle school for health and education. I have two daughters that work at Central School. Neither one have had a foreign language or a health class taught by a teacher certified in either of these disciplines, nor have they ever received a grade in which the report says they need, according to the state of Maine, Education Chapter 131 law. So, you have 150 signatures that are asking to have health education K through 8 by a certified health teacher. You have been given copies of our students' health behaviors as reported by My House, which includes substance abuse rates, tobacco use rates, suicide ideation rates, many of which are higher than the state average. And if you look at the mid-coast data, our rates are here, Brunswick rates are here, Mount Holyoke's rates are here. We're all above those other districts. Since July, students from RSU1 have made the front pages of our newspaper 7 times for health-related issues, including substance use and suicide. The state has asked the RSU to teach health education in foreign language. You have told them you have done so. It is time for you to do what you are asked to do by the citizens of the RSU and what the law requires. By not providing these 2 subjects to our students, you are causing a huge disservice, which have been both long and short-term results. When our students don't have adequate basic skills to manage their own health, this greatly affects their health outcomes. Not studying a foreign language limits our students' knowledge of society outside Maine and the U.S. and makes them less prepared for our global society. In closing, it should not be this district's choice whether or not to teach health education or foreign language to our students. It is your obligation by law. Our elementary and middle school students deserve to get the education that they are promised as residents of the state of Maine. Again, and you talk about budgetary items tonight about laptops. A 1-to-1 laptop, $150,000 a year for the next 4 years that we don't even own. We're talking about preschool. We've spent $0 on health education the last 2 years in this district, K through 8. It's time to put up the money. And you talked about we're starting middle school. The average age a student starts to drink in this country is 11. So you're starting late if we just focus on middle school. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. We will move on to item 19.0. Set next meeting dates and locations. 19.1, we have got 3 public meetings to discuss the cost sharing referendum. They're listed here as different items 2 are listed as a workshop, 1 is listed as a public hearing. I was under the impression that these are all informational meetings to present to the public what is going to be on the referendum. I don't know if you wanted to add something to that?
No, they all are.
Okay. My plan, I think I have to attend all 3 of these meetings. It's going to be tough for me to make the one on the 12th because I will be at a conference. I would hope that board members could attend 1, maybe 2 out of these 3. There's one this Wednesday, the 27th. There's one Tuesday, the 5th. There's Tuesday, the 12th. I know I'm throwing a lot at you with these finance committees on the 4th and on the 11th. But if you can make, I expect you to make at least one of these. If you could make a couple, it would be helpful. But again, these meetings are just going to be presentations to the public about the cost sharing referendum, kind of giving them the details and taking questions and answers from the public. All right, any questions about those meetings, comments about those meetings?
Who's doing the presentation?
It will be
Tim.
It will be myself, Patrick, and Ruth. Okay, item 19.2, our next regular RSU1 board meeting is scheduled for the 25th of March. That one will be at Dyke Newell. I just need to make a mention that we will be changing the date of the April meeting, giving you a heads up now, because the currently scheduled April meeting, both Steve and I are away. So unless somebody wanted to lead that one, we will be rescheduling it. So if you could just add to your calendars the March meeting. And we now have to go to executive session. Is there a motion to go to executive session? Moved by Bill, seconded by Dave. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll probably head back down to 301 for executive session. Student members, you don't have to participate in this, and I don't expect this to go any more than 5 or 10 minutes. But if you have your own vehicles, you can get it out.